So today we're going to talk about one of Ireland's most loved songs. Now this is a strong statement to make, but I think if you got a group of Irish people and asked them what is the most loved or most heartbreaking Irish song of all time, I think the majority of people would say this one. Just before we get into the video, I just want to announce that I have 3 online Irish history workshops coming up at the end of November. The tickets are now available and they're linked in the description below. So this song was written in the aftermath of the 1916 Easter Rising. The Easter Rising was a 6-day battle where Irish rebels proclaimed and demanded an independent Irish republic free from British rule. The Irish rebels seized some symbolic and some strategic buildings in Dublin City. After a 6-day fight, Patrick Pearse agreed to an unconditional surrender. Dublin City had been shelled to bits and the loss of civilian life was too much to carry on the fight. In the aftermath of the Rising, 1,800 men were shipped across the Wales to Frongoch internment camp where they spent 6 months. Also, the leaders of the Rising were put in Kilmainham jail and 16 of them were executed in the coming weeks and months. So at this stage you might be wondering, well, who is Grace and where does she come into all of this? At the time, Grace was a 28-year-old woman from Dublin City. She was a cartoonist and an artist. She grew up in the suburbs of the city in Rathmines. She spent some time being educated in London. However, she returned to Dublin in 1908 where she began to work in the city. Upon Grace's return to Ireland in 1908, her friend Nora Dryhurst actually brought her to the opening of a new school one day in Ranelagh. The school was called Scoil Éine, or in English St Enda's, and while she was there she met a guy called Joseph Mary Plunkett who would become her future partner. Joseph Mary Plunkett was also 28 years old at the time. He was a poet, a journalist and also an Irish Republican. He grew up in Upper Fitzwilliam Street in Dublin City and came from a relatively wealthy background. He also studied in England for some time but returned to Ireland and graduated from UCD in 1909. When the 1916 Easter Rising was being organised, Joseph Mary Plunkett was appointed Director of Military Operations. Now Joseph suffered from ill health all of his life. Just a few days before the Rising, he had an operation for glandular tuberculosis. Regardless of his ill health, he got out of his sick bed on Easter Monday, the 24th of April 1916, but he was given an aide-de-camp just as a bit of help as he was in bad condition. His aide-de-camp was a relatively unknown IRB man at the time who would later become one of the most famous people in Irish history, and his name was Michael Collins. After the Rising, the leaders were put in Kilmainham jail. On the 3rd of May 1916, Joseph Mary Plunkett's friend and Grace's sister's husband, Tomás MacDonagh, was executed by firing squad in the Stonebreakers yard. Upon hearing this devastating news, Grace now knew that Joseph was to be executed the following morning. Grace ran into Dublin City. She picked up a wedding ring in a jeweller's on Grafton Street and she made her way over to Kilmainham jail. Just a little side note, Joseph and Grace actually had been engaged since 1915. When Grace got to Kilmainham jail, with the help of a priest, she managed to persuade the British authorities to allow her and Joseph to get married. As a persuasion tactic, Grace actually pretended to be pregnant. However, little did she know at the time, she only found out later that she actually was pregnant at the time. Unfortunately, at a later date, she did miscarry. Grace Gifford and Joseph Mary Plunkett got married that night, the 3rd of May 1916, in Kilmainham Jail Chapel. A few hours later, Joseph Mary Plunkett was executed by firing squad on the 4th of May 1916. And this is the story of one of Ireland's greatest songs of all time, Grace. I hope you enjoyed this video, everyone, and just to mention it one more time, I'm running some online Irish history workshops at the end of this month, November 2023. If you want to pick up some tickets, they'll be linked in the description below. Also, if you want to learn more about the history behind some of Ireland's greatest songs, you can pick up a copy of my new book, The Top 10 Irish Rebel Songs, which will also be linked below. Other than that, I'll see you in the next one.